isn't it?
It is. It is.
How on earth did they manage it? It's just weird.
I'm thinking also, Adrian, here of again, if we go back to Egypt for a while, the Stargate theory. If we think about it in the context of the sci-fi story, the Stargate theory is that they came here from another place, whatever it might be Orion, might be from another galaxy even, and set up civilization here, set up shop, as it were, as you mentioned. Does this have anything to do with the Stargate theory that you were mentioning briefly in the first segment?
I'm glad you mentioned Stargate, because Stargate SG-1 is one of my all-time favorite series.
Oh, really? There you go. Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
I love the first film that did it. Yeah, it's incredible. I really
when that film came out, I went to see it, and it was just around the time the Orion mystery was launched.
There you go.
And I thought, my God, if they got hold of our manuscripts.
Could have done, yeah.
One of the first things that happened was that Daniel, I think his name is, who's the Egyptologist, a bit geeky, and he's kind of translating the hieroglyphs for them. And the clue to him is Orion. He realizes that these glyphs represent different star groups, and that gives you the address. It's like a big telephone, isn't it?
Yeah.
You dial up the address, and then you can zoom up to the stars. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that film, in many respects, was kind of prophetic of the situation that we're in. The idea that there are other civilizations elsewhere, and maybe they're human-like. I mean, this is the other weird thing, isn't it? And this actually comes back to what J.J. Hurtak was saying, that the pattern that we're built to, the pattern of Adam and Eve, comes from the stars.
Mm.
Now, that is I suppose it's a very controversial theory. Do we come from apes or do we come from the stars?
Mm.
But there's something about us, and you have to wonder about evolution. Again, I'm a skeptic on the idea that evolution is just blind chance. I can't believe it, that every little thing in your body is so clever. Every little tiny thing that works, and there are all sorts of little tiny glands that do this or that, or cells which are specialized to do some particular thing that affects some other part of the body. To think that has all just evolved out of the mud, just of itself, for no reason. Yeah. It's like lifting yourself up by your own shoelaces. You can't do it. It just doesn't work.
And even they've shown how protein is being assembled almost by these tiny machine-like things, and it's like the chicken or the egg. What came first? For a function of this to exist inside the body, if something must have this must have been there to begin with. It doesn't work out.
That's right.
It doesn't work.
Well, it's working against the laws of physics, which are everything runs down. You've heard of the word entropy.
Yeah. Everything
tends towards disorder in the world, doesn't it? A steam engine is not as efficient as the energy of the coal it burns. There's some energy is lost, and constantly, each time energy processes go on, each time energy is transformed, brings more disorder. So you have the idea of the universe as a clock that's running down, and your body ought to be, with all those complicated molecules, burning in this oxygen-rich atmosphere and turning into something less complicated, but it doesn't. You see a baby and the baby grows. It becomes an adult. It matures. It develops. And I remember a scientist saying to me, a lecture I was at a long time ago, and I was at university, and he said, "How do you unscramble an egg?" Right? Scrambled eggs. Right? So how do you unscramble an egg? And think about that. How do you unscramble an egg? And the reason you can't unscramble it, of course, is connected with the ideas of entropy and irreversibility. There's only one way to unscramble an egg, and that's to feed it to a chicken.
That's a good point. Yeah, I see what you mean.
It's the only way to unscramble an egg. Life has a power to bring about order. When you have something like a chicken, which is filled with life, it can reorder the energy that's contained in that egg, that scrambled egg, and produce a new egg, a higher order thing than the scrambled egg. That has the potential to become a chicken itself.
Yeah.
So you can begin to understand that there are other forces, other processes involved in this universe than the simple material energies that we deal with in science, in physics and chemistry and so forth. There are life energies. There are energies of mind and consciousness. There are energies of creativity. And these kind of form a whole scale of energies. Have you ever heard of a guy called Robert Flood? Lived in the 17th century.
Definitely heard the name many, many times. Yeah.
Right. He was living in the early part of the 17th century, just before actually the time of the Invisible College, and he wrote a number of books going into all of these subjects and actually laying out the concept of ladders of energy reaching up to God, and scales of music. If you've heard of Gurdjieff, a lot of Gurdjieff's ideas, I'm quite sure, come from Flood.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, so this idea that there are scales and levels of energies is what's the missing part of what we're taught in science today. And once you begin to understand that, I mean, and I know that the car you drive today has evolved from the kind of Ford Darroch of 1904, the cars that you see in those old films. You can say, yeah, well, my car's evolved from that. But you know very well, and I know very well, that it didn't just happen. A lot of intelligence and thought over the decades has gone into taking that car and moving it forwards. It's the same with computers. Yeah. The first computer I had, had 2 floppy disk drives and a tiny memory of a few K, and you couldn't do very much with it.
Yeah.
The computer I've got on my desk now is probably more powerful enough to send an Apollo spacecraft to the moon. I mean, when I was working in Sweden in 1981, the guys there, I was a computer programmer at the time, and the guys there very proudly showed me the pride and joy of their computer room, which was they had a brand new disk drive which held a whole gigabyte of data.
Oh my!
Right?
Yeah.
And it was the size of a washing machine.
An incredible machine. Yeah, there you go.
I've got a little, one of those little memory chips you stick in, which holds 8 gigabytes.
Yeah, yeah.
A thing which is only about 2 inches long.
Yeah.
This is evolution.
Progress,
but it's progress. But it happens because people are intelligent and they use their minds, address those problems, and they move things forward. It doesn't happen because the washing machine size disk drive bumped into another washing machine disk drive and said, well, actually, we could do this better if we, accidentally, change the configuration of the chip.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. Nothing happens by accident.
Of course not. It's so obvious when you think about it, really. Absolutely. Yeah. So what you're saying here, I guess, so you're using the computer as an analogy for what is happening with the human species and other species on this planet, how we're evolving, and also that it is a conscious force, right, that is behind how this progress is taking place. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Now, thank you for that, because think of this. The first computer I had, desktop computer, right, was great. I could do my word processing on it. Right? Then I got a more powerful computer. I could do some graphic stuff with that. And then, I got a few more programs. I could do my accounts and a few other things. But the big change came when, I think it was 1995, 96, I first plugged it into the World Wide Web. And suddenly I can send emails. Suddenly I can access websites elsewhere. Suddenly my computer, which till then had been a kind of self-contained unit, became part of this network.
Awareness, consciousness came into the picture.
Yeah, and it could access all of this knowledge all over the planet, and just have to Google in any word, and you can pick up links to websites that you didn't even know existed anywhere. Suddenly this thing becomes not just a toy and not just a sort of little personal thing for doing sort of writing letters or whatever. It becomes a channel into the whole of human knowledge. Now, I see this as an analogy to us. We've got a computer in our heads, our brain. And, you're educated at school, you learn stuff, you put it in.
You program the brain, right?
You program your brain,
yeah.
and you learn by experience and so forth, and you maybe become a bit creative and you do some stuff and you write stuff and so forth. But what if your brain could click into something the equivalent of the internet? And this is what the ancient Gnostics were all about. When you read the Hermetica, which I republished, this is the ancient book, supposedly written by Hermes Trismegistus. It's actually a set of lectures and essays from probably around the time of Jesus, maybe a little after, that were from Alexandria, a school in Alexandria. And it begins with his own initiation, the initiation of Hermes. When he meets a being who calls himself Poimandres, which means shepherd of men, and identifies himself as being the higher mind and the Logos, right?
Yeah.
And he initiates him, he shows him how the universe works, he shows him about the fall of man and what's possible, etc. This is a very, very important book. It was a big inspiration for people at the time of the Renaissance, and also people like Robert Flood wrote a lot about this. But imagine if, as human beings, we could switch on that part of our brain which connected us with the higher mind.
Yeah.
Then we would become aware again of the greater purpose of the universe. Instead of it being just us here in this planet doing our own thing, out of sync with nature, we would know what the plan is for the whole of nature and for ourselves and for the universe and everything else. We would know the mind of God. Yeah, put it in other words, in religious terms.
Interesting.
And that, to me, is what all mysticism is really about, is about reconnecting to the overmind, the big mind, yeah?
Yeah.
Big G, tetragrammaton, whatever you want to call it, seeing what he has to say about the subject. And this is why you get the whole idea of Jesus, for example, and he's saying, not my way, thy way. I put my own will aside, never mind what I, as little ego, want. What's the big picture? What's it that you want? Big God, big I. And that, I believe, is going to be the major step that the human race is going to have to face in the next generation, or maybe even sooner, maybe even the next few years, is this transition from this kind of fragmented societies that we live in, where everybody's ambitions are different from everyone else's, where everyone's trying to pull a quick one over on everyone else, where the politicians are corrupt, the bankers are robbing, and there's too many of us anyway to feed. And, the sheer injustice of our situation, to connecting to the higher intelligence, that which actually put us here in the first place. Because I don't believe we came here by chance. I think that that's a naive attitude that modern science has developed, to think that we're here by chance or that life just evolves by chance. To me, that's just naive. They think I'm naive for believing in God,
right.
But I think they're naive for not believing in God.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. And it's you're talking about this in the terms of very near in the future. Is this an event then that might take place, or is it a realization in various individuals that slowly initiates, if you will, or begins this process of reconnecting with the archetypal image of what God is? Or what do you think it is?
Right. Well, let me put the time context in first of all. I wrote a book in the year 2000, well, that's when it was published, called Signs in the Sky. And that was basically an exploration of biblical prophecy in the light of modern day astronomy, but also linked in with Egypt and the pyramids.